studying investing for a while that you done them. Nothing I'm going to tell you today is a secret. It's not something that's, I guess what I want to say is anyone in this room could execute these strategies. They're not, they don't take any sort of special intellect or special situation. There are certain things that are probably important to execute some of them. So some of them might require more experience, I would say, than, or they don't require, that's a wrong way of putting it. They might be easier if you have more experience, right? And so I'm going to talk about 4 different kind of situations in which you could get into a house with low money down. But let me ask you this. I'd love to see a raise of hands of who is most interested in the owner-occupied situation of low money down. Okay, and then who is non-owner occupied? Okay, all right, great. So I will cover the owner occupied first, but I'm going to spend a little. I'm going to focus on some of the other ones, and then the whole thing today is really open for questions. So if you have a question, just kind of try to grab my attention, and if I feel it's something that I'm going to cover later, I might ask to defer. But other than that, I'll try to answer everything I can. So. Jordan kind of mentioned this, by the way, I think it's kind of hot. Jordan kind of mentioned this, but I've either executed myself on all of this or helped clients do it. So these are all things that I have firsthand knowledge and experience with. Owner-occupied, so you've all probably heard of low down payment loans, right? You've got FHA and you've got conventional. Those are the 2 basic options if you're buying multifamily. You can get in with 3.5% or 5% down. If it's a multifamily, meaning 2 or more units. If it's less than 2 units, then you've got 3% down. Those are the standard programs that you can get from anywhere. I would call that low money down right there, right? I mean, it is pretty low money down. You can decrease the amount down and out of pocket, right? So when people hear this, like no money down, a lot of times they might think that they're getting all the money through a loan. And that actually can be true. Some of the strategies are that. But it's not usually one loan, right? It's a combination of loans. If it was, I guess what I'd say is if there was 100% loan out there where it was just one loan, you'd already know of it and you wouldn't be here tonight, right? So the key is understanding that where is the money coming from? Is it coming from your pocket or someone else's in the form of a loan or a partnership or a gift or something like that, right? So the way most people, and again, so the most common way people get into like a duplex or something like that with no money down or very little money down is to use either FHA or conventional financing and get a gift from a family member. That is the most common way. It's not the only way, but it is the most common. So a parent or a combination of family members gift you money to come up with your down payment. So on a $200,000 duplex, a down payment on FHA could be as little as $7,000. Doing that, and if you were able to get a gift of, let's say, $5,000 from a family member, then the rest of it would be, $2,000 plus whatever closing costs the seller's not covering. So that is like one general path that a lot of people use. But getting a little more
personally, gift to me always sounds like, hey, somebody's just giving me this money. In most of the circumstances that I work with people, it's not a gift. You don't get it forever. It's usually a very low interest or no interest loan from a parent, and that's how these people have proposed it to them. Hey, give me $7,000 and I'll pay you back in a year, and maybe I'll pay you back $8,000 or something.
Especially if you're living basically rent-free. Think of it this way. If you were able to get a situation, we have only a few clients who truly live rent-free, by the way, so I don't want to make it sound like that happens all the time. But we have a couple this year that have are making money on their house or paying $0 to live there. And for those people, imagine they would normally have to pay $1,000 a month or more. Is it really a big deal to pay $1,000 a month back to someone for 7 months or even 10 months? Probably not, right? Because you'd be doing it to an apartment building anyway. But other ways you can come up with that money, again, so I'm kind of going with the most generic first. These are the most common ways, so they're not the most creative, right? I admit that. I'm not trying to like bore anyone with, oh my gosh, this is all common stuff, but you need to hear it just in case you never have. Borrowing from your 401k and or taking a distribution from your 401k and or taking a distribution from your IRA. And there's different pros and cons to those.
That's what I did for my first.
Yeah, and so like when you take a distribution, you have a tax liability potential, well, not potential, you almost, I guess it depends on your situation. More often than not, you'd have a tax liability on that. Nothing overly substantial, but you can take up to $10,000 out of an IRA, penalty-free, but not tax-free. Depends on how the money went in. If it was a Roth, you've already paid the tax. If it's not, if it's a traditional, then you have to pay the tax on that. But instead of taking the distribution, you can you can borrow the money from your 401k, right? So here's where you're stacking loans. You can think of it like stacking. So you need $13,000 for your down payment. You take 10 of it from your IRA. Maybe you can borrow all 13, I don't know. But let's just say you can only borrow 10. You take 10 from your IRA. You get a gift for 3 maybe. And that's another way you just came up with no money down or very little. 3,000 out of your pocket, 10,000 from your IRA. You pay the IRA back by living cheap and using the money that you're getting from rent to pay the IRA back, right? So those are all possible ways that you could do this. Another option that the state of Minnesota offers, if you're income qualifying, is that you could get what's called down payment assistance. So down payment assistance is not free money though. Most people think first-time home buyer money is free money, and they think that it's all good and not bad. And I'm not here to tell you it's bad, but I'm here to tell you that it is more expensive than if you don't use it. Meaning that I can get you a better interest rate with lower closing costs if you don't use down payment assistance than if you do. But let's look at the pros and cons here for a second. Okay, it's a little bit more expensive. It's not extraordinarily more expensive, but it's $1,843 more in closing costs automatically, because there's things they don't cover for us as a lender that all my other lenders cover for us, right? So they're not reimbursing us, so guess what? You gotta pay it. They're hard costs and someone's gotta pay it. So $1,843 more in closing costs and at least a slightly higher rate than what I can get you on the open market. But for that, you get a down payment of either $8,000 loan from the state of Minnesota that you have to pay back when you leave the house. So if you turn it into a full-on rental, which a lot of people are planning to do, right? So you got to know that. Or if you sell, or if you refinance, you have to pay that loan back. So, or at the end of 30 years, you'd still owe that money. So that money never disappears. You owe it, but it's $8,000. And 30 years from now, $8,000 should seem like a very small amount of money, right? In theory, if inflation keeps up. The other option the state has is up to $15,000, but in that circumstance, if you take the $15,000 option, you have to pay them back over a 10-year period. They actually have a scheduled repayment program, and they charge you interest on the money. And the theory there is if you need that, they want to keep the program going. If you have the $15,000 out for 30 years, that prevents them from being able to help other people, right? So by you paying them back and paying them back with some amount of interest, it basically just feeds the program so that they can keep doing it. A lot of states have these programs and they go in and out. They don't always have the money. The state of Minnesota has been very good over the last roughly decade, probably less of always having money. Meaning they have run out of money in the past, but it's been a long time. So it's a really, really well-run program. You can get that $15,000. I can tell you that most people don't even need the full 15. That's usually for most people, if they're qualifying under that program, more than they actually need. But what it does allow you to do is it allows you to make an offer to the sellers where you're potentially not asking them to help you with the closing costs or help you very little with closing costs, and that can make the offer a little bit more attractive on that side. The downside of these, I'll tell you, is sellers don't like that loan as much. They assume that if you're using that program that you are less qualified than everyone else that's making an offer, so you better make a really strong offer. I mean, it's just fact of the thing. You better wow them with a little extra cash, right? No.
Yeah.
You need to talk about the truth.
Sure.
As about what how sellers feel about your financing matters to whether your offer gets approved. So it's important for you to know that. We still use it all the time. I do. Well, I shouldn't say all the time, but I do 6 to 10 of those a year, something like that. I don't know the exact number; it varies every year. But very good program, and I know people who have made great situations. And if that is your only way you need to get down payment, you should use it. It does have a higher credit score requirement. So, for example, I could get someone financing at a 580 credit score with pretty poor rates, with much better rates at 600, and at 640, really pretty attractive rates. And you need to be at 640 just to get into the entry level for down payment assistance. So there are people sometimes that come to me where they just don't fit the whole puzzle. There's also income limits on those programs, they vary too much for me to get into all the details now, but we can cover it on a case-by-case basis if anyone wants.
Is that neighborhood-specific income?
There are a few programs that are neighborhood specific, but those programs I don't like to promote because they're always out of money. They're in and out, like, you know, they might be able to do 10 people in a year, that's it. So, and depending on when they get for their funding, let's say they get their funding, you know, let's say it's mid-January, by June they're out of money. You know, so we can talk about them if you know what neighborhood you want to be in and it's very specific. That often those programs are funded in such a way that that money is forgiven over time, but it's also usually very small amounts of money, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. It's usually not a very big sum.
You can stay in those a long time too, that to be forgiven, right?
Often it's about 5-6 years, something like that. Yeah, I mean it varies. Each program's different, and you know, the cities have programs too. But like for example, St. Paul hasn't had funding in their program for quite a while. I don't keep up on it real close. I can't tell exactly how long, but I would suspect it's been a year since St. Paul's actually had money in their program. Minneapolis comes and goes. Minneapolis program is called the Home Program, HOM. You can look on their website, but I love using that program when it's available because it's cheaper than the state program. But again, it's really hit or miss, and it does delay closing. The city of Minneapolis has basically two little centers that you can go through. They're like neighborhood community organizations you can go through to get the money and to get the funding, and they take a month from the day they get all their paperwork to closing, and they need enough stuff that it takes us at least a few weeks to get that stuff for them, right? Like they need the appraisal. The appraisal takes 2 weeks, and you don't order it right away because you've got other things going on. So those programs do take probably close to 2 months to close without hiccups. But I do like them. I actually prefer those for the customer. They're a better deal, I guess you'd say, but we'll leave the ones there. Okay, so that is like an overview of the house hack and like all the different little strategies, right? Combining loans, gifts, loans for down payments, stuff like that to get to you know, a little low to money down, no money down situation. State of Minnesota programs, city programs that are all possibly available. Any questions on any of that stuff? Okay. A thought about closing costs real quick. When you're owner occupying a property, the seller can pay, depending on the loan program, either 3 or 6% of the purchase price towards your closing costs. That money comes in handy, and without that money, the amount of money you need at closing can be easily $7,000 to $10,000 more. So that is something you want to try to negotiate into the program, and if you're in the market to buy right now, between now and the end of March is your best time to get closing costs from the seller. They're most willing right now because they're the least amount of buyers, so there's a lot more flexibility. The amount you can get depends on the loan program and or your down payment. Some programs offer 3% with a certain down payment and 6% with another, so again, not worth getting into here. 2 other things I didn't mention for owner-occupied that are worth mentioning is if you qualify as a military member, either active or a reservist for enough time, you can get a 0 down loan through that. And also, if you buy in a rural area, an owner-occupied rural as defined by the USDA, 50,000 or less population, and you're in a city area with no agricultural use of the land, then you can get 0 down financing as well. But I have never done a duplex on a USDA loan, and I'm not sure you can do anything other than single family. My gut tells me you can't, but I haven't looked it up, so again, that's not a sure thing, but I think you're probably only single family on that one. I know for sure you can buy a multifamily duplex on VA, but they are making it harder for VA. They have changed their rules on how much, if you can use rental income or not. And by the way, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae for sure, I think Freddie Mac also, they've all made changes to how you calculate rental income, making it a little bit more challenging. It's most challenging for those who need to use rental income and currently live with family members. That's where the guidelines have kind of skewed against you. If you currently rent and pay a rental payment, and or have another house payment. Those situations are a little bit easier. I don't think it's gonna affect too many people in the room. We looked it up and kind of said, it's gonna affect, 2 deals a year, 3 deals a year, but it wasn't something that was crazy. Is that an adequate, for the people in the room who, because there were hands up, for the people who are interested in owner occupied, were your questions answered?
Did you say that the seller will cover closing costs through the end of March?
More likely.
I guess what I was trying to say, and because I don't want to mislead anyone, is that you could get that any time of the year. What I'm saying is you're more likely to get it now because there's less people between now and March buying. Sellers are more motivated because there's basically a smaller pool of buyers, so they're more flexible right now. And basically, now is the time of the year to get a deal, and one of those deals is how much they're going to pay in seller closing costs at the agreed upon price. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You can get up to 6. And frankly, the lower value, so most closing costs are a flat fee. They're not related to the purchase price. For example, an appraisal costs the exact same on a $100,000 house as a $400,000 house. No difference. And there's many fees like that in getting a loan. So when you're looking at a lower value home, if the seller pays 3% of the price towards the closing costs, it doesn't usually cover them all. But if it's a higher value home, sometimes it's too much. You don't even need all 3. Especially if it's really high value. So, that matters too. If you're in a lower budget range, it's much better. I would say the next 4 months is your best time of the year because everyone's looking for a $200,000 to $250,000 duplex. There are so many people because that's all they can afford. That if that is you, I recommend that you do everything you can to dress warm and go look at houses in the middle. And the colder it is, the snowier it is, the better for you. And if a seller is selling this time of the year, they are not, it doesn't mean they don't want the best deal they can get right now, but they're also not in the mindset of, I'm trying to get top dollar for my house. Because if they are, they would just wait till June. Because everyone would tell them, all the statistics show them that they're gonna get more for their house in June than they will right now. That also means you're gonna pay more in June, right? So keep that in mind. And you'll have less chance to get closing costs, all that kind of stuff. One other thing about that, because this is mortgage math, and every single time I talk about this, I give this math, but it's just so important for everyone that it's worth repeating over and over. And that is for every $1,000 that you change your mortgage amount. Doesn't matter if it's an extra down payment or an increase in price or decrease in price. If you change your mortgage by $1,000, it affects your monthly payment by approximately $5 a month. Okay, that's approximate. It's probably $5.20, right? If you want to get real specific, it actually depends on the exact interest rate, the loan program, the mortgage insurance, the down payment. So there are factors there, right? But $5 is really, really close. So that means if you ask the seller to pay $6,000 in closing costs, you're talking about $30 a month. What's easier for you to swallow, $1 a day or $6,000? Right? I mean, so sometimes people think, oh, I want the lowest possible price. In my opinion, you want the most possible closing costs first, then the lowest price.
Does that make sense to everybody? I think that's a really important point.
I think it's one of the most important things I ever teach people, and it's very, very simple, but it can be over. I can't really mention it often enough that how important this factor can be. Because putting it a different way, what if you buy a house that needs a little bit of work? Would you rather, essentially, let's say it needs a little bit of work and you're like, well, I got the money, I can pay the closing costs here. Well, and let's just say that's up to $8,000. So $8,000 times 5 is 40 bucks a month, right? So $40 a month or $8,000 towards the remodel of the house, right? I mean, you're essentially financing it. So it's really powerful. And even if you have the money, things come up in houses, right? You're gonna need to buy shovels, maybe a snowblower, other things, and there's expenses when you buy a house. And it's really nice to keep cash in your hand if you can.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, what he's saying is, so just to make it simple, let's say you have $10,000 in closing costs, and the seller says, hey, I want $350,000 for this house. I'm not taking $1 less. And so that means you can't get closing costs with that $350,000. So you say, hey, okay, how about I pay you $360,000? You pay $10,000 in closing costs, And so you get the 350 you wanted, and I have to bring $10,000 less to the closing table. So that's really important, because if you're getting started, if you're buying rentals, essentially if you're an investor and you're not just buying the only house you're ever gonna own, you're gonna need more money in the future to buy more rentals. So if you blow your whole $10,000 you had there, and yeah, that's not gonna buy you another rental, but that's that $10,000 closer to the next, if the numbers work at 360 and they work at 350, maybe you pay a little more and you hold some money in your pocket so you can go do another deal later, sooner, rather than having to wait to save up 10 grand.
That's exactly right. It's momentum, but it's also safety. I hear people like, they often talk about like having, like they think I will be safer if I put more money down, right? Because I'm borrowing less. Not true at all. The least safe thing you could do is use all your money and put it all down and have no money in reserves when you have the opportunity to have money in reserves. And the reason why is $1,000 will pay for a water heater, but $5 a month would take, what's 1,000 divided by 60? Or $1,000 divided by 5, 200 months to pay for a water heater. 200 months to pay for the same water heater that you can have the cash right now. So what's safer is having the money in your hand if you can. If you can't, some people just, let's face it, some people have to just get in and they're not gonna have a lot left over. And that happens. Ideally you have some access to credit maybe, get some, or something, or some help from family, but I've been in situations where I got into deals where I had very little left over, so it happens. It does, right? There is a little bit of risk, there is a little bit of things we do as investors, but any other questions?
This is probably more on the lending side. How does, I don't know if you'll cover this, but how does rent offset work as a owner occupied? Say I have 2 roommates and I'm collecting X amount for rent. How does that work as far as what do I need for time frame to count that?
Okay, so rent as income. Okay, it depends on how technical I want to get here. But you said a word. There is roommate. You said roommate.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And then there's rental income.
Yes.
In the industry, roommate income is also called boarder income, by the way. Technically, if you read the guidelines, they call it boarder income, they don't call it roommate income, but that's what they mean. That's the definition. And this, essentially, I'm actually ignoring one program here, but this does not count. The only way you can use that income, there's a couple of programs, but they are just like, I'm gonna paraphrase the guideline because I don't know that I'll get everything right, but you have to claim it on your taxes for, depending on the program, either 1 or 2 years in a row before you can use it. Who do you know that puts their roommate income on their taxes? Right, so technically you can use it, but I've never seen it happen, ever. The other situation, there is another program out there, but it has to be the exact same people that have lived with you a minimum of 1 year, and you have to prove that they paid you rent for 1 full year, and that those exact same people, no changes, are moving into the next place. How often does that happen? I know of one that we're gonna use that, we could use it. The thing is, the guy doesn't need the income, so it doesn't even matter, you know what I mean? So boarder income, if they live in the same unit as you, a duplex, you're on one side, roommates on the other, or single family, and they're in the same unit that you live in, can't count that income, for the most part, right? If you think that you might qualify because you're claiming it on your taxes, or you've got people moving from one property to another and they already rent from you, we can talk about that as the exceptions, but basically, roommate income doesn't count. Rental income, on the other hand, does count at 75%. So, if you have $1,000 of gross rental income, then we would count, right, 75%, we would count $750 of that towards your income. And this is actually how people qualify for duplexes at a much higher amount than they would on a single family. Because here's where we get back to this, and this is why this is so dang powerful. 750 divided by 5 is how much you increased your purchase power on that property, right? So 75 is at 200. Let's see, if we divide this by 5, is that 200?
150.
It must be 20, what would it be? Someone do 750 by 5, I'm good at
150.
math, but up in front of the room I can't. do it.
150.
150.
You
So
said
you just
s-
increased your purchase power by $150,000 with that rental income. Right, because of this math. Because when a mortgage lender qualifies you for a house, they don't qualify you for a $200,000 house, they qualify you for a payment. Okay, so what goes into that payment? The interest rate, of course the house price does, but so do the taxes and the insurance, right? Now, what changes that payment you qualify though for is your income. So if you just bump your income by $750, you just increase that payment by essentially a ratio somewhat similar to this $1,000 to 5. Roughly speaking, right? I mean, this is very rough. It won't be exactly that depending on your interest rate and the mortgage insurance you have to pay and stuff like that. But that's roughly what it would do. So super, super powerful. This plugged in right now. Okay, so let's go to non-owner. This is where you start to get more creative. This is the world that I kind of live in myself. I don't have unlimited funds. My wife and I at the peak, we're up to 20 units, 10 properties, actually 11 properties because we have some single families. That was for a very short period of time, and we sold off 7 of the properties, and we're down to 4 right now. I think it's 7 units. And this is what I do almost every time, but I have actually done this and this combined, because all 3 of these strategies can kind of be used in some form of combination. I wrote them separately because they're kind of distinct, but you can mix and match them to create a situation that works for you in stack financing, right? If you want to think of different financing, you can have your loan and then you can have a stack, and potentially you could have another stack if the lender allows. The more creative you get here though, the more a lender and the people you work with are going to want you to have experience. So this is not a rule. Anyone in the room who is a newbie, has never done a deal before, can do everything I'm showing you here now, but it's highly likely to get people to agree to do it with you, you're going to need to have some experience. And what I mean by that is this. I'll give you an example. I share this all the time. Hopefully my aunt is watching. I won't say her name, but I borrowed $117,000 from my aunt to buy 2 properties a couple years ago. And so what I did is I paid her, I took non-owner financing, not through Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, by the way. These loan programs that you use to get this kind of financing, you can't do that through your traditional lenders. You can't just call up the person that you bought your owner-occupied house through and get a loan that will allow this. But there are loans out there, the generic term for them is portfolio loans, or some people call them commercial loans. I use the terms interchangeably. Those loans don't have the same rules, they have more flexibilities, but they have some downsides. I'm not gonna talk about the downsides right now, I'm just gonna talk about the upsides. What they will allow you to do is, for example, borrow your down payment. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have a strict prohibition on borrowing your down payment. Any person who brings money in the transaction must be on the loan, and the money must come from the owner of the property on their loans. But in this case, my aunt could borrow me the money. She had no ownership. I paid her a very high interest rate, which I happily paid, frankly, because I wanted to do the deal and I wanted her to be happy. And I wanted her to make enough money that she wanted to do it again, right? It doesn't help me let's say I got her for about half the interest rate on this deal, but I only got 1 deal. Well, I profited $105,000 or more. That's just in sale price on those 2 properties, because we've already sold them through Jordan, actually. They sold, they closed, and when you take all expenses out, we made on sale price over $110,000. Sorry, it was like 111, something like that. Not including the rent or other benefits we received, right? I would have received none of that if it wasn't for my aunt. So I want her to share in the wealth enough that she wants to do it again. So I sometimes hear people, oh, I'll get a family member, give me stuff for 6% or 8%, and I say pay them 12, if it works. To pay them enough because they've got other options too, right? They love you, but they got other options. And if they can make 10% easy in the stock market or their IRA and not have the risk, right? They might do it once, but they're not gonna go over and over again. Anyway, so what do? You get a loan where you get a loan for, let's say, 75 or 80%. That's gonna depend on your situation through a portfolio lender. And that portfolio lender will generally, especially if you have experience, sometimes if you don't have experience, they won't though they might be a little bit more skeptical on this, but they'll still probably allow it, that you can just get 100% financing from whoever you're getting your second mortgage from. Usually that person is gonna be someone very close to you. It is not gonna be like calling a private money investor, and they're not gonna, the people who lend money for a living privately are not gonna give you that kind of deal, especially not in your first deal, your second, but maybe not even your 10th. Because it's considered high-risk lending, because it's 100% financing, right? What made it more beneficial for my aunt, and one of the reasons she agreed, is the properties were gonna be worth more than we paid, so that was kinda nice. But also I had other properties that I could give her liens against. So if I didn't pay her back, she could foreclose on more than just the one property, or the two properties that we borrowed against, right? And because of that, she had some safety there. Of course, she didn't wanna do that, but in the end, she deserved the money. If I didn't pay her back, she deserved to get her money back, right? So that's another strategy you can use, right? You've got this primary residence that you purchased and you house hacked, and now you're looking to move, and you've got some equity, but you can't really tap it, and there's not enough there to refinance and pull it out and do it on your own. But you got, let's say, $20,000, something like that in equity. You'd say, well, look, I'll give you the lien on this other property, plus I'll give you a lien on this one, which has got $20,000 in equity, and that will help kind of offset something if something happens quickly, right? So I have done,
Good question.
yeah.
Could your aunt have lent you that money through her 401k?
That's an IRS, that's like a CPA question. I think the answer is no, but I wouldn't be 100% sure. And the reason is there are IRS rules when you're using 401k money of dealing with close family members. And I don't know if aunt is acceptable, but I'm positive if it was my father or my brother that I couldn't.
Okay.
I know that for sure. I don't know the aunt relationship, like where they draw the line, but my suspicion is no. Now, if it was someone who wasn't related to you, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and I actually, my IRA currently has loan out to a person who flips properties for a living. So that's an interesting thing. When you start doing this kind of stuff, you get creative and you get into worlds of people who do this all the time. So I bought a property for someone, and I got seller financing for just the down payment. So I got a loan from one of these portfolio lenders for 80% loan to value. And the seller borrowed me the other 20% loan to value so that I had 100% financing, right? And again, it's not worth getting into all the details, but I got the closing costs paid too, but not through traditional means. I got creative on that. Actually, from the renters paid my closing costs, believe it or not. Yeah. Interesting story. Maybe I'll tell it at the end. But this seller who did this is a house flipper. I bought the house from him, and he wanted to unlock his capital, right? He had all his money tied up in the house, or a lot of it anyway, hundreds of thousands of dollars tied up in the house, and he wasn't getting the profit he needed out of it. He's getting lowballed. And I said, well, geez, I'll give you all your profit, but at your price, you'd agree you're not gonna get it from anyone else. I need you to basically borrow me your profit, and I'll pay you interest on it for the next 5 years, and then I'll pay you your profit 5 years from now, right? And so he borrowed me $61,000, $62,000, something like that, for 6% interest-only payments, and I paid him off after like a year and a half, something like that. Okay, because we sold it and made a ton, like $100,000 on that property. I think it was even more than that. That one was extremely profitable property in a very short period of time, with no money out of my pocket. So you could get off seller financing, of course, but that's harder to do. A lot of sellers want some money. It's probably easier to get the seller to give you 20% of the purchase price than it is to have them give you 100 or 90 or something like that. Very few sellers will give you 100% financing, by the way. And if they do, it's so rare that I would have antennas up and be kind of scared. I mean, seriously, I would, like, because if what happens if they have so here's the danger in the foreclosure crisis that you need to know about seller financing. Seller has a mortgage, right? They get they sell the house to you, but you don't really own it. They sell it to you on seller financing, but they have a mortgage on it. If they stop paying this mortgage, the mortgage company forecloses on the house. All the notices go to the seller. They don't go to you. Next thing you know, you literally don't have possession of the house anymore. You have no legal rights, and the seller's taken whatever little money you've paid them along the way. It happened a lot in Minnesota, but even more in California. Basically, if someone was going into foreclosure and said, I'll sell you my house, just give me $10,000 now and $2,000 a month. And they get $2,000 a month for a year plus $10,000, and then at one point they're just vanished. There's no legal rights. So you have to be very careful. I would not do those type of structures without an attorney involved, who writes up all the paperwork and gives you protections to guarantee that you can check that the payments are being paid on the mortgage if it's not free and clear. And if it is free and clear, you even want to have some sort of rights on title, so that basically if they try to finance it, you're notified, right? You've got to have some protections. Not worth getting into great detail there, but you got to be really careful on that. So seller financing, what do you do? Seller financing is literally whatever you can agree to. I went to a class. There's a guy, his name's like Chris McCloskey, who he makes offers to sellers of very high prices, higher than what anyone else will offer, with no interest. He usually gives them 10% down. Sometimes he gives them 20% down, and he pays a very high price, much higher than what the house is worth today, with no interest. So basically, you can say all the interest is included in his price. I've made plenty of offers. Jordan's helped me make offers on properties. I usually make an A or B offer. A offer is generally a price that I don't think they'll accept. That if they accept it, I'll be extremely happy and I'll come up with a down payment some other way. And then B offer is usually a higher price than I kind of want to pay. It's the highest price I'll possibly pay, but they have to lend me the down payment to all of it, so that I'm getting 0% financing. And I'm okay with that, right? I'll give them a little more for that situation, and that's usually the one I want them to accept, believe it or not. I found that in doing that, the last 2 times I've done that, they've all agreed to the lower price, the offer A option. And Jordan helped me get a house that way this year.
When you offer a higher price, is it like higher than market value? And if
It's probably not higher than market, because I still need an appraisal, but it's probably the high side of market. Yeah, or at least the high side of what I'm willing to pay anyway. Maybe not even always the high side of market.
Yeah.
But they're only going to be willing to do that if they're a little bit, what I call tenderized, right? So the house has been on market a while, something like that. There's got to be a reason why they'd want to do that. Any other questions on that kind of stuff? So you can see how you can combine, seller financing could be your whole thing. Could be something like a contract for deed, could be a mortgage. There are differences between contract for deed and mortgage. They are similar, but they're definitely not the same. If I were gonna just generalize it, legally speaking, a contract for deed is better for the seller than the buyer, because it's extremely easy for them to foreclose. It's not actually a foreclosure. They just take the house back a lot more like you would evict someone for rent, for not paying rent. It's not exactly the same, but it's way closer to that. It's a very easy process. There's a low threshold. It's easier for you to get ripped off as a buyer, though, from someone who does it that way, as opposed to a mortgage. Because a mortgage, they have to foreclose just like a regular mortgage company. They have to go through the whole process. It's a lot more expensive for them to do, so they might not be as willing to do that. I'm just giving you pros and cons. I'm not saying you only buy it if you only get a mortgage and not if you get a CD. You just got or contract for deed, but you just got to be careful. And if you're going to get in that world, you need to hire attorneys. Don't do that on your own, because it's very. I actually had someone. So here's the example. As a mortgage lender, I see all this stuff, right? Because I deal with a lot of investors. Almost all of my business, almost all of my income's made from working with people like you, investors and such. And I had a guy, they call this kind of stuff subject to. You ever hear that term? It makes people feel cool when they talk about that term. I'm telling you, it's ripe for issues. And I came across that. I can't tell you how much more the guy ended up paying because I don't remember. But essentially what happened, my client or my customer bought a house from someone subject to, and that person I don't even think was probably a legal U.S. citizen, but certainly left the country after the transaction and just disappeared. That person also had gone through a divorce, and so there was massive problems with the title work that were very hard to fix, because the true owner of the property was still the subject to person, this person who had left the country. And long story short, the person left with liens that hadn't been paid, so there were liens against the house. It was that person's responsibility. But guess what? the house doesn't become my client's house until they're paid. So it doesn't matter whose responsibility are. He doesn't own the house unless it gets paid. He can't force the other guy to pay him, it's his responsibility. So he took on, I think it was somewhere in the ballpark of 15,000. Wasn't crazy money, but he also had a lot of legal expenses to fix the title work and to get all the divorce stuff figured out. And it took a long time, and it was very, very expensive, just because he did the subject to without an attorney. You know, so
That's
make sure you have an attorney.
What he's.
He didn't close with the title company either. They did it on the cheap, right? They did a contract. So if he would've closed with the title company would've said, well, he got his lien, right? Trying to save a few hundred or even $1,000 in that situation, not smart.
Yeah, so I think what he's saying is to always use an attorney or a title rep and have
Yeah,
somebody reputable do this work for you, so it's completely
Yeah.
worth it in the long run. Even Tim and I ran across one recently that neither of us.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna buy it.
Yeah, something called adverse possession, where essentially, let's say you moved into the house that I left 5 years ago, said, I don't want this anymore, and you started paying the taxes 5 years ago, and no problem. Maybe I show back up today and say, hey, I want my house back. I still have legal title to the house. You don't. You have reversionary rights when the property goes through a certain process. This property that Tim was looking to buy that I found, the guy living in it didn't have title to the property, so he didn't have rights to sell the property that he was selling. So if we would have gone through with it, let's say Tim had the cash laying around and didn't use a title rep and just said, hey,
Yeah, I'll just buy it.
I wanna
So
buy
cheap
your
price, I'll just
property.
buy it.
Yeah, I'll just buy it. It was a great
It was
price.
an uptown duplex for $175,000.
Yeah.
In poor condition, but not awful condition.
I can't tell you how many calls I got about this, because it was on the MLS for $175,000 in a neighborhood where houses are selling for $300,000 to $400,000 in bad condition. So everybody's like, oh my God, this is an awesome deal. It took all of 5 minutes to figure out that it was a nightmare.
Yeah, as
This
soon as
guy
we
didn't
figured it
actually-
out, we were like, you're paying $175,000 to potentially rent the property until some person comes back and takes it back from you.
Well, yeah, so why it matters using people, and I think
Yeah,
seller financing, all that, it's awesome when it works out right and you use the right people, but using a lender is awesome because they do all the background homework to make sure that they're lending money on something that you actually own and they can actually sell if you run away. So if you do seller financing and you don't do it right, you do it on the hood of a car, somebody can come back and take the property, no problem. You know,
you bet.
Thanks.
Yep.
I actually like using lenders because they cover their back. They're lending the majority of the money.
Yeah. The last thing I have there you see is partnerships. So how are partnerships valuable? I mean, well, obviously you can use a partnership to come up with your down payment, right? That's the number one thought I have there. But why would you do this? You know, if you, I mean, I guess it's pretty simple. If you would have nothing without the partner, or you could have, let's call it 50% with the partner, what's better, right? My partner Eli and I bought an apartment building in Louisville, Kentucky. I own 29% or something like that. I have 14 other partners, including Eli, on that property. Okay? I don't own anything in that property without those 14 other people. So there are situations where partnerships can be valuable. I say this often too, but it's worth repeating. Make sure the partner brings something that you don't. The most common partnership that I see is two college buddies, usually males, sorry, they just are, that both have a hard work ethic and really want to make it happen, and they have no experience and no money. That makes a horrible partnership. The best partnership is that person combined with someone who's got a ton of money and no time. And that person should hopefully have experience if you have none. The truly best partnership is when that hard worker has experience but just has run out of money, you know, and so you can combine the two. But there can be other things too. Maybe you have a contractor, you don't have a good contracting background, and the contractor has some money, you've got some experience, you're willing to work hard, but the contractor's making a lot of money as a contractor. Another good partnership, right? But your partner should have something that you don't. Your partner should be my aunt, or your partner should be, you know, have whatever you're lacking, is what they should have. But in this case, you can get a partner to bring your whole down payment, or a very large portion of your down payment potentially. Maybe they say, you know what, if I'm gonna do this with you, I wanna make sure you have something to lose, I want you to have the 10,000 in, or 5,000 in, or something like that, right? But those become smaller problems to overcome than trying to find $100,000 for a nice duplex in Northeast Minneapolis, right? So having a partnership where the partner can bring your down payment, I closed one of those, actually, what would it be, like 2 months ago, a month and a half ago, something like that, where partner was the guy's uncle. He brought the down payment, the customer did everything else. My client did everything except the down payment. And actually, he brought part of the down payment too, so. And he didn't give up nearly half, I think he gave up 17% or something like that, because he had a decent amount of down payment and did all the work. So those kind of things are another flexible way, another easy way, or a combination, right? Because you could get a partner to bring half your down payment, get the seller to bring half your down payment, and potentially you have 100% financing that way too, right? Any combination of this could work. What can't work, by the way, which is totally illegal, is bringing a partner in on an owner-occupied property. If you do that and don't disclose it, you just created fraud, and it is a federal offense. I want to be real clear about that because I'm a loan officer, and if anyone tries to do it with me, I'll kick you out of my office.
I had a guy messaging me today asking about, well, can I owner occupy a property and just, or say I'm gonna owner occupy, get this awesome down payment and then just not go do it. And I said, hey man, you're playing with fire.
Yeah.
Quite literally jail time. Huge fines, jail time, not worth it. Save up the money, figure out how to get the money another way. Don't cheat the lenders.
You can always do this, use the down payment assistance program, and you're in for $1,000, potentially. So, it's not worth it.
No jail time.
And no jail time. Yeah, so. What sort of questions do people have?
What do you recommend for an attorney?
For an attorney, I use Brad Shipley. What's his website? Is it Minnesota Landlord Law or something?
I think so.
Something like that?
I have
He's-
another one.
He posts on Bigger Pockets quite a bit. If you want to, I can certainly get his contact info, but I don't remember his URL off the top of my head, but it's something like that.
Hey, you want to use an attorney that obviously is a real estate attorney, but I like to use any professional, a lender, a realtor, attorney, title representative, even my inspector owns rentals. So I like to use people that understand rentals inside and out.
Yeah.
The attorney I use, he's fixed up rentals on his own. He's
Yeah.
done all the work, he knows it front and back.
Yep, I think it's just important to use someone who specializes. Because there are, if I was using an attorney to evict someone, which is who I'd use Brad for that, that's a different conversation than potentially writing him a contract for deed. I'm not sure of his experience in that level, but I know there's people that's kind of all they do, right? So I might potentially look around depending on Brad's comfort level with that topic, right? So each topic's gonna be slightly different. And if I wanted to set up a company, well, that's pretty easy. I might actually use a CPA for something like that. So it depends.
You talk about debt to income in terms of getting a loan. Isn't it a certain threshold you might hit with a lender that your debt that you're taking on, they're just not going to loan you past that limit of your income?
Absolutely. So wherever that threshold is, that becomes your maximum payment you qualify for, right? So if your debt to income ratio, which is the amount of debt you have to versus your income, if that ratio, once it hits its max, that's gonna translate into a payment. And let's call that payment $2,835.19. You can't exceed that payment. Now what you look at is how much are the taxes on the house and how much are the insurance gonna be? Because even though that might work out to be, let's call it, I used a weird number, but let's just say that's a $400,000 house. On some houses, that'll be $390,000 because the taxes are high. Other houses, you could offer $407,000 because the taxes are lower, right? Mm-hmm. So you don't qualify for a price, you qualify for a payment, and that's based on your debt to income. And then the other factor, of course, is your down payment capability, right? So those are usually the two main limits. Because sometimes I have people where they qualify for a $700,000 house, but they've got $20,000. Well, you can't buy a $700,000 house with $20,000, so their limiting factor is their down payment.
And with the seller financing, the non-owner occupied financing, it gets more creative too. So if you're buying a $1 million apartment building, you don't have to make enough to cover a $1 million loan personally.
Right.
The property, and then they do look at you too. So something I didn't know when I bought my first commercial property was it's not just about the property, it is about you too.
It really is, because the property won't support your whole life. And if the property goes under, they wanna know that you can support your life without sucking money out of the property, right?
Yeah.
Cause if you're gonna be, so if you've got enough property where if this property goes down, all the others will support you, that's a different story. But when you're building up and you're in Jordan and I's point still, we're doing well, but we're not doing that well. We still need to be able to support ourselves through other means than the property we buy. Right?
I guess I have two questions. The first one is, when you're talking about your two offers that you generally put in, your offer B, for the seller financing of the down payment,
Yeah.
obviously it's not as risky, like, if they were gonna seller finance the whole deal, where you gotta make sure that they're gonna pay the mortgage. Do you still do something to make sure what do you do to make sure your seller financing is still safe, you know, that, I mean, does it really matter?
Do you mean safe for you or safe for them? Cause there's actually two kind of.
Either way, I guess, mainly
Well,
for the buyer.
well, the safe for you is, like I said, making sure that they can't, finance, you know, put another loan on the property. But in the case where I'm doing it, I'm buying it, so I'm the fee owner, I own the property.
Okay,
They're
so you
literally
have-
just loaning me the down payment.
Okay, I
Right.
get you.
That's a little different than if it was a contract for deed, which I talked about, there's some
Yeah.
dangers there. And I'm not able to really get into the idiosyncrasies of that, that's an attorney conversation. I can just tell you there are plenty of them, and you should have that conversation. To make the sellers more comfortable though, like I mentioned, you could give them other assets, right? So if you're giving them 100% financing, they really, if they had to foreclose, they would lose money because they have to pay someone like Jordan to sell it, right? And they gotta pay attorney's fees, and they gotta pay all this stuff to even get the property back. They're gonna lose quite a bit of money. You could give them some interest in another property if you have one. So I wanna be super clear too. These strategies are not for owner occupied. There's something called Dodd-Frank, which is a federal law that the strategies you're using here, the loans there, are not underwritten to Dodd-Frank standards, meaning that those loans have to be for business purposes and non-owner occupied. So you can't do this with that, and that's kind of what I was saying is, these are very, very separate. There's a hard line there, for federal reasons, for lots of reasons really. So if you're looking to get into these creative things, these are non-owner occupied.
And I get, sorry, you go first.
Go ahead.
My other question is, you guys kind of said sometimes you can hit a wall with getting too many properties or something. What are some of those?
Well, so a lot of people really focus in on conventional financing, right? They think it's the holy grail. I disagree, but I mean, we bought our whole portfolio, one Fannie Mae loan, that was it. Once I learned the differences, I never went back. I'll never get another Fannie Mae loan again on an investment property. I think they're worse loans, but for what it's worth. What people are referring to though is Fannie Mae's guidelines for non-owner occupied properties get harder once you own 4 properties. They get harder again at 6, and then they won't allow you anything over 10 finance properties.
Just because they're worried about if something goes under that you can pay for all of it, kind of deal?
You start
Yeah, they
requiring
just-
you have
they-
at least 6 months reserves at 4 for all of them, is that right?
It's a
Am I correct?
percentage of the outstanding balance is what it is. It's no longer reserves.
Okay,
And the percentage goes up depending on how many properties you own.
yeah.
So it's like, it goes like from 2 to 4 to 6% or something like that at different stages. I don't even know, cause like, I don't see very many people who ever do it.
I have a friend that's running into this problem right now, and I'm a little familiar with it.
You should get a better loan.
But, so
You should talk to me.
essentially, once you get above a certain amount of properties, not only do they want you to have a down payment for the next property you're looking at, which, you know, in his case, he's finding properties, no problem to buy. He needs to have a certain lump sum sitting in the bank after closing to cover any sort of incidentals. And you'd think, so I had to do this for one property, you'd think, oh, well, I can just draw down on that lump sum and go buy the next property. Yeah, you
Well, you can, but you have a
hypothetically
minimum.
could, because
Yeah.
you need to have that minimum there, so. It gets harder and harder the more you go, so.
So
Yeah, once you get to 4, it gets a lot.
I don't run into the problem often, so I don't memorize the numbers, but it goes something like this. They don't count your owner occupied property, and they don't count the property you're buying, and then every other property after that, you have to add up all of the outstanding principal balance on all those properties, and then multiply it by a percentage, and it depends on how many properties you own, that percentage, and I think a very common one is 4%. So, if you had, 4% of $1 million, right, 40 grand, right, is that right? You have to have 40 grand in the bank in that case. They count, retirement accounts, but, they count that at 70 cents on the dollar. So if you had 100,000 in a retirement account, you get 70 towards that number. But if you only have 20 in a retirement account or something, does not that much. So we had 2 people, I'll go with the next in line.
I was just curious, and maybe this is not a big deal, but when you talk about the USDA loans,
Yeah.
100% finance,
Yep.
who sets that 6% that you could use as seller contributions?
What do you mean, who sets it? The
I mean, we're-
guideline is set by the USD and or FHA or,
As
so
the
it's
most?
not set by the lender. Yeah, as the cap,
Okay,
right? You could also go under, right?
yep.
So here's something that's interesting, and I kind of get on this, I wouldn't say it's a fight online, but I'm constantly trying to correct people online. You're gonna see this all over. You're gonna say, I'm going to this lender and they're telling me I have to put 25% down on a property, and most people's advice is gonna be find a new lender. That is mostly incorrect, but partially true. What you really need, what they need to say is find a new lender who offers a portfolio loan. Because loan guidelines are standardized across the country. I don't care if you come to me, Wells Fargo, or the person down the street, they cannot change Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac's guidelines. They are what they are. They can make them harder, but they can't make them better. They can't make them easier, right? So they can't say, Wells Fargo can't say, we got a Fannie Mae special, we only require 20% down on Fannie Mae loans. No, Fannie Mae won't buy the loan. It's no longer a Fannie Mae loan if you don't meet their guidelines. The whole purpose of the guidelines is so the mortgages can be bought and sold nationwide. They're all sold on Wall Street. New York City gets all of them, and they sell them across the country, and your parents own a part of someone's loan somewhere. It's just the fact of the matter. That's how it works. But they're standardized. Now, lenders can make them harder. They could say, Fannie Mae's guideline, for example, minimum credit score 620. You cannot get a Fannie Mae loan if you have a 619 score. I don't care what lender you go to. A lender could say, we don't do Fannie Mae loans unless you have a 640 score. That is totally legit. But they can't say you can get a 619 in our company. Okay? Can't make it easier, can only make it harder. So that leads to your question. So I get these people all the time, they're like, oh, I want to find a better down payment. Well, what loan type do you want? Because you can find a better down payment, but not if you're comparing apples to apples, right? So I offer 20% downs on duplexes all the time, but it is not a Fannie Mae loan. And I think it's very misleading for people, and there's a lot of ignorance on what you can and can't get. So if you ever want to just know the guideline, contact me, I'll send it to you. Because if a loan officer can't send you the guideline, then they might not know what they're talking about. Yeah? Any other questions? Oh, Eric, you have a
Yeah,
question?
so now's a good time to buy because it's the winter and the sellers are more
More motivated, for sure.
motivated, sure.
Yeah, both.
Do appraised values of houses get affected by the seasons and how
They
markets heat up or not?
do, but it's actually, there's a lag time, right? So you're still in an okay lag time because you're working off appraised values from the fall. And, over the next few months, as these houses sell and close, because they don't become official till they close, then those values will affect appraisals. So you could say, most purchases, the overwhelming majority of purchases, with realtors involved, you don't have appraisal issue. And because your buyer's agent is saying, this is never gonna appraise for that price, we can't offer that. Or we don't know that it'll appraise for this, and they're talking to the seller's agent saying, you know what, I think we can both agree that this is a questionable value. If it doesn't go, we're gonna negotiate down, or we're gonna kind of come to some resolution, right? So there is a limit there set by people who know what they're doing, going, it's kind of a crazy price, right? So where it comes in most is on refis. There's no one there saying that. The appraiser has no idea what the agreed upon value is because there is no agreed upon value. And so you'll see that affect refis.
I get that a lot too, people say, my appraisal only came in at the offer price. And that's a good thing, it means it appraised at the price, but I don't know how many you see above the offer price. But
Not too many, a few here and there.
Yeah, if it comes in above the offer price, you got a really good deal. If it
Yeah.
comes in at the offer price, you still got a good deal, but people misunderstand purchase appraisals, and I think they think, oh, they're just looking at an objective value of the house and they have no baseline. No, their baseline is the
The
price.
actual
you offer.
purchase price, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're gonna come to the purchase price unless it's not unless it's not justifiable.
Yeah, yeah, so don't be upset when you agreed to buy a house for 400 grand and it comes back exactly at 400 grand.
And I doubt any of you are sellers here, but one thing I think that realistically from an independent third party, if you're a seller and your appraisal comes in low, you know what that means? That means you got the most you possibly could for the house. You got the top dollar that house could possibly be worth, right? Because let's say you sold the price for 210 and the appraisal comes in at 200, what was the house worth? It wasn't worth 210 for 200. So if you have to go down to 200, you just maximized your value. You couldn't have gotten another dollar for it. Is that bad?
Well,
You know?
yeah, if you're trying to like leverage money, like HELOCs, for instance, and you were refinancing houses that you owned to get
Mhm.
the best value for appraisal.
Yeah,
is
do it
there a
now.
time of the year to do that?
Well, now, or a couple months ago, would have been maybe slightly better, but now's good. Yeah. The worst time is the spring, right? Because you're using values from the worst 3 months of the year. But, I mean, what are you gonna do? So, here's the thing, is it better to do it now? Sure. But if you're not ready, you can't do it now. You don't wait a full year to the next fall so that you can use the winter values and pass up on all kinds of great deals for 12 months just because you want to time it right. You do it when you're ready. That's the truth, you know.
The best time is always now. Eventually, if you get started now, you're gonna be further ahead than you would have if you waited for the perfect time. Oh, I found this perfect property at perfect time, but it took me 4 years to find it. Hey, if you would have bought 4 years ago and bought one every year, you would make 4 or 5 or 6 times the money. We had somebody in here recently, they've been looking at real estate investing for the past 5 years. Like, you just missed out on the 5 best years in the real estate market.
Yeah,
that
you
we
could have
have.
overpaid 5 years ago and you'd have made 6 figures.
Yeah.
Maybe more. Maybe a 6-figure that starts with a 2 instead of a 1.
Could have overpaid every year for the past
Yeah.
5 years and made just a boatload of money. So, anyway, there's a bunch of fears rolling around right now. Well, they seem to have subsided, the recession fears, but everybody's worried about a recession. If you buy something and the numbers work and you could hold on to it for whatever amount of time, let's say it's 10 years, you're gonna make money. But if you worry about starting at the right time, you're never gonna get started and you're not gonna make any money. So,
Yeah.
the right time is whenever works for you personally,
Right.
not the exact right time.
Yeah, on the drive over here, I heard something that I wanted to make sure I brought up today too. I thought it was really, it was great, it was good timing. Some procrastination expert had given some tips on how not to procrastinate. I don't know that any of you are procrastinators, but what I see a lot of from the investing community is people who overanalyze, they get that analysis paralysis. And so the advice from this person was to break it down to the smallest, simplest step, preferably something that you do all the time. And the example they gave is if you're just trying to go out and find a new job and you're procrastinating finding a new job, they said the first step is actually just to turn on your computer, which is something you do all the time. And your brain won't fight you to do that. So wherever you're at, find someone who can tell you what that next step would be if you don't know. You probably know and you're just avoiding it. But take the easiest part of that step. It might be writing an email to an agent saying, I want to look at a property. Or it might be you've looked at properties and you just don't make offers because you find a reason not to. I hate to waste agents' time, but it might be what you need. Write an offer, even if you think it might not get accepted. At least you're taking that next step towards potentially getting your house.
We see that.
You
So
know.
when we're teaching new agents how to work with people, we encourage them. A lot of people don't want to work with investors. They don't want to make offers. Whatever. Well, what if you make an offer, it doesn't get accepted? But yeah, psychologically, and I've seen this personally, once I make an offer on a property, it doesn't get accepted, maybe I made a horrible lowball offer. I'm gonna keep making offers until I find something that works, and eventually I'm gonna find something that works really well, but I know if I don't take the first steps, I'm not gonna get in that rhythm. I always equate stuff to going to the gym, because I've worked in the fitness industry for a long time. If you go to the gym a couple times and you get in the habit of actually showing up at the gym, you're much more likely to keep going to the gym and actually cut those pounds off that you're looking to lose. But if you never go to the gym and you look for the perfect program, it's not gonna happen.
Right, yeah, you don't have to be perfect. My good friend says don't let perfect be the enemy of good or something like that, right? So, you don't have to get, there is no perfect duplex. They all have flaws. They don't have flaws, they're so expensive that you can't make them. So there just isn't a perfect duplex out there. So find one that works for you.
So one quick question, maybe it's a broad question, but how does so Fannie and Freddie are mostly 20% down?
25.
25%
If it's a
down?
duplex,
Okay.
or bigger.
Okay.
Yeah.
And rates right now are what, about 4.3?
My gut would tell me a little higher than that, 4.5.
Okay.
It all depends on what you're paying for closing costs.
Okay.
Yeah, on a duplex, right? And
Yeah.
non-owner occupied. If you're owner occupied, the mid to high fours right now.
Okay, and is that?
Those are 5-year fixed,
Okay.
and the rate adjusts at the 5-year mark. But unlike a traditional fixed rate loan, they don't adjust every year. Because normally what would happen is if you have a 5-year fixed rate on an adjustable rate, it's fixed for 5 years, and then every single year after that adjusts.
Mhm.
On these loans, it usually adjusts one time at the 5-year mark, and then goes another 5 years and adjusts again. Traditionally, that's how they do it. Every lender could be a little different though, so it's worth asking the question, and that's
Gotcha.
what's most typical.
So how much down on those
20.
last two?
Well, 20, yeah. Those
Okay.
both about 20. One was a refinance, the other was a purchase.
Okay. Got it.
Even that's gotten better though, because it used to be, my best price lender, the more stuff I send them, the better they've gotten. They used to only do, you have to put 25% down if you're doing rehab,
Mhm.
and one of those is a full-on rehab. We get, they're giving them 20% down now.
So with Fannie and Freddie, you're getting a slightly better percentage, but you're paying, I mean, what's the?
Yeah, but the closing costs on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, on average, typically are higher.
Oh, okay, so that's.
Not that that matters that much, because they're giving it whatever. I mean, it's all, we're splitting hairs on those kind of things,
Yeah,
like it's so
finance
close.
costs.
Here's some good math. This is a house that Jordan helped me buy, and I think this will put the difference, and this is why I only use this loan type. Look, one of those erasers or something. Here we go. So here's why I would only use this loan type again. These are really, well, this is 1836 Taylor. Just so you know, this is an exact property that I own, that I purchased using Jordan this year. And what I'm showing you is the difference between two different lending types. So we paid $297,000 for the property, and our rehab ended up being approximately $40,000 in rehab. Okay. So can someone do the calculations for me, because I don't remember the exacts. I need to know what 25% of 297,000 is.
14,850.
25% of 297,000.
75.
Oh, my bad.
74,250.
74,250. Okay, so that's the required Fannie Mae down payment, right? Right there. What we did, so this is like a conventional loan. This is what would happen if we go to most lenders. And this is a portfolio loan. We took 297. We added 40,000. Can someone give me what that figure is? Even though I can figure it in my head, I just don't want to.
337.
Thank you. 337,000. Now what's 20% of that? It's like 113 something.
67.
Oh, I'm sorry, 67,000, what was it?
400.
400. Okay, now add $40,000 to this, because you can't finance under Fannie Mae rehab loans out of duplex. It's like 114,250. look at the difference between these two. Would you pay, let's just say you can get a rate of 4.3 on this. Would you pay 4.64 or 4.65 to have that much less cash in the deal? Because remember this too, this is nearly 2 loans. Let's just pretend that this property makes me $1,000 a month, which I think it does. I think that's a fair number. But you don't want to step over dollars to pick up payments, right? And here you're looking at a marginal difference of 0.35 per year. Who knows what that means to them? The answer is almost nothing. It's probably $50 less a month. But what the difference between this and this is dang near a whole nother $1,000 a month, right? Might be worth $750 to $800 a month because I could go buy another property with the difference, right? And it might not make me 1,000 because it's not quite as nice of a property, but it might if I get a deal. So people constantly focus on rate, and frankly, coming from a lender, you might think that this is like, I have something to gain here. You don't get paid based on the rate you get. It's against federal law for you to get paid based on the rate you get. It don't matter to me what rate you get. I usually, so I don't care if you pay a higher or low rate, as long as you use me, right? I mean, it don't matter. So my point is this, don't focus on rate. It means almost nothing. You should get the best rate you can on the loan program that's best for you, but the exact rate that you pay means nothing. It's what will the loan product do for you? What will that loan do for you? And if it can include financing, if it can include better down payment, better closing costs, all those things do so much better for you than a 0.35 difference in rate. Yeah, I mean, and I can just show you the math. It's actually a simple, pretty simple math. We have to make assumptions, but it's how much are you gonna lose by not having, by having an extra, who knows what the difference is here, but an extra lot of money, out of your pocket into this other deal. Because remember this, $1,000 for $5 a month, this extra money didn't lower that payment that much. I mean, it did, but we're talking about hundreds of dollars, not thousands of dollars lower. Versus a lot more if you go buy another property. So this is like the power of financing. And once you really understand financing and you don't look at it like your parents look at buying a house they're gonna live in. If you're going to look at a house that you're gonna live in, a single family that's not gonna generate any income, the advice should be different. Yeah, sure, go for the best rate. But on these,
Most money down, not everyone.
maybe not most money down though, that's still,
Well,
because unless you own your
everybody
car
wants
sprinkler and you don't
to
have any
PMI.
debt. Yeah, well, what's more expensive, PMI or a car payment? Or, you know what I mean, like, people don't look at the whole picture. If you look at something in a silo, you're gonna make the wrong choice almost always. You need to look, because interest rates on mortgages are cheap. In mortgage insurance, although it's not super cheap, it's pretty cheap. So, and it's way cheaper than a credit card. Way cheaper, or not way, it's slightly cheaper than an auto loan unless you get a subsidized rate from a manufacturer. But if you get that subsidized rate, you're probably paying a higher price, because it usually comes in lieu of a cash back program.
I think that comes back to taking it, if you ask for advice for your Uncle Bob about buying a house, your Uncle Bob's gonna tell you how, would you do this, put 20% down so you don't pay PMI and do these things, and
Yeah.
Uncle Bob
It'll
owns
make that one
house.
transaction look really sweet.
Uncle Bob's only done one house his entire life.
Yeah.
Like, find somebody that does this over and over and over, and hey, well, what's best for my scenario? And I think Tim does that for a lot of people that are working with him, is, hey, what are your goals, what are your long-term goals, what do you wanna do? Hey, you should do this, Uncle Bob's gonna tell you what Uncle Bob did to buy the one house Uncle Bob's lived in for 35 years. That doesn't really apply to you as an investor. And if there's an Uncle Bob watching, sorry, I don't have an Uncle Bob.
No, I mean, I run into it all the time.
Yeah,
Where people
all the
get
time.
awful advice from their parents.
Yeah, I get
It's the
lots
same
of
advice that
people.
everyone gives though.
Yeah,
It's always the same.
It's a soundbite.
But
People
it's
get.
because it feels good, not because it makes mathematical sense.
Yeah. There's those sound bites for lots of things that you're gonna run into. Fitness, wealth, health, marriage, there's always, somebody's got advice on something. If you want advice on lots of different categories, I could ask every one of you in this room, and you're all gonna give me a different answer. And it's gonna be given with conviction too. If I ask you how to lose 10 pounds, you're gonna tell me, and you're gonna tell me, and you're gonna tell me. Or if I ask you how to buy a house, everybody's gonna have different advice, but find people that are experts in this area and ask them what you specifically should do. You pay experts to give you advice. You can go ask the same advice from people and you're gonna get answers galore. I've consistently been in industries where there's always just blanket advice, and this is how you do this, and I've
Yeah.
consistently found that everybody loves to give advice. Everybody's gonna tell you what to do, but very rarely do the people giving you advice actually know what they're talking about. Maybe they do.
Yeah.
Maybe Uncle Bob owns 300 single-family houses. Okay, Uncle Bob's a pretty credible source thing, but
Right.
it just depends.
Yeah. I like to look at it kind of like this. There's usually, in what I do, there's usually a mathematical answer, and the math doesn't lie. So,
Math doesn't have opinions.
yeah, it certainly doesn't have an opinion. Now, I will say that there are circumstances where there is a little bit of a, there's like a lifestyle thing that goes into it that might not always be the best mathematical decision, but there is a mathematical decision in it. And so, usually if you take the emotion out of it, the decisions become easier and you don't have to be as scared.
And yeah, there is emotion. I've got a good buddy. He owns a bunch of rentals. He's paying down his house as fast as he can. And he fully understands, hey, this probably isn't the best use of his money. He put tons of money towards his house in the last few years. But we could have made a lot more if we would have invested that in more rentals. But emotionally, they need that comfort blanket to feel good, and that's fine.
And he's probably at a point where he knows he doesn't have to make more, it sounds like.
He's got, I don't know,
Enough.
15 or 16 rentals now. He's doing fine. But yeah, personally, and they recognize that it's an emotional thing. Sometimes there is emotional things that come up. Oh, I need to have a house with a fence and a yard.
So, yeah, one of my mentors, and this is something you can kind of like find online. His name's Rod Khalif. He has, I'm in his coaching program, right? So I pay him, and I've met him, and I can't say that I know him well, but I do know his story. He was a multi-millionaire. I believe he lost $30 million, if I remember correctly, in 1 year in the crash. He did not have a property where he had a loan higher than 30% loan to value, meaning he had 70% equity or more in every single property, and he lost them all. It is the biggest thing that I like to fight against, and the biggest false thing I ever see is that equity means almost nothing in terms of safety unless you have 100%. Otherwise, it means zero. Because if S hits the fan, equity will do nothing for you. What will do something for you is cash. And so what Rod didn't know then, and but what he needed to do was have all those things owned at 50 cents on the dollar, or 60 cents on the dollar, and the rest of it kept in cash, and he don't own all of them today.
Are you saying if a deal makes sense, like if it pays you enough and it's guaranteed to, like through the rents to pay you, if you can get in at like not 10%, but like 20% on like a big deal, would you do it?
I think the least money you can have down with the most amount in reserves is the safest.
What do you mean in reserves? Like just
Cash.
Oh, okay.
Having money left over to pay for problems. If water heaters break, if roofs fail, if tenants stop paying. Having just cash. Cash is the safest thing for a landlord to have. They call it liquidity. You need to have liquidity. And sometimes liquidity for some of us, like because again, I'm taking risks. I don't always have a ton of cash. I'm not trying to say I do. I just think that's the best. But I came up with a formula where I tried to have $20,000 in my business bank account that I don't touch. I'm below that right now, so I admit I'm not perfect. The advice I'm giving you, I don't always have that. Well, I mean, technically I have 44,000, but a lot of it's spoken for something else that's going to be gone soon, right? I mean, so like technically, if you look at my account today, there's 44 grand in it, but 35 is disappearing very soon, and I'll be way below where I want to be, but it's a risk I have to take because I feel like I'm not in immediate danger, right? You know what I mean? So I'm taking calculated risk. So what I'm saying is you need to come up with a number that you think is going to create some safety for you and try to sock that away. And for the most part, that's your goal, to always have that as your buffer. And if it's not cash, then the next best thing, it's not as good, but the next best thing is like a line of credit, right? And that's how we grow, is we take calculated risks at times, and you take that risk when you go, how is the economy? How are my rents? You know what I mean? That kind of thing. That's why I'm taking the risk right now, because I feel like I'm in a good spot. All my properties are in good condition. When I do execute on this other one, I'm gonna get some money back. I'm not gonna have all of that 35,000 in the deal when it's all said and done. So I have to put it out there and risk it for a while. But you need to have cash. That's the most safe. Way safer than putting a lot of money down on the property. Because here's that math again. You put that money down, what does it save you? You put an extra 50 grand down. Let's just say 50 grand, right? What's 50 grand gonna lower your payment?
250.
250. Will 250 save you from a foreclosure if a tenant stops paying? Probably not, right? With 50 grand?
Yes.
What if the roof failed, both water heaters failed, both furnaces failed, and all your tenants stopped paying for a year? Would 50 grand save you?
Yes.
It'd make you almost foreclosure proof for probably close to 5 years,
I
right?
think this,
Maybe longer.
this matters more the more properties you get too. So if you have 0 properties and you buy a property and you're saving $1,000 a month on rent, well, you're not paying rent, it's essentially rent. This is what I did. And I didn't have any money in the bank when I bought the property. I used it all.
Yeah,
But
sometimes you
it
have
was-
to do
it
that.
was
I do that.
One property. There's one water heater, there's one furnace, there's one roof, there's one set of windows. There was no situation where I couldn't come up with the money to fix that stuff off credit cards or just save money for a few
Right.
months. So yeah, the first one, you might not be able to do this, but once you're at the 5th or 6th or 7th, you might wanna consider starting to do this, because
Yeah.
you're just risking everything.
I'm with you. I'm not telling people like, don't buy a house till you have 20 grand in the bank. That's not realistic. You'll never own a house.
Yeah.
What I'm telling you is, best case scenario, safest case scenario, isn't to take that extra 50 grand and put it down into the house. It's gonna do nothing. It'll make your spreadsheet look better. It'll make that one transaction look better. But think about it, 50 grand is dang near another property. Save it in the bank, wait, get it up to 67,000, and then see if you can execute on something. Then you'll be at a point where you got nothing for a little while, but that's just how it goes,
Yeah.
Every few years, I'm at that nothing again, for a little while. It's like, but we're doing it because we're making what we feel is calculated decisions and risks.
So you'd rather, say I have 20 grand cash in the bank and 50, 60 grand on a HELOC on a house, you'd rather pull from the equity and have the cash for reserves?
It depends on what you think is going to happen with the economy and that HELOC. For example, HELOCs can be, the reason why a HELOC isn't as good as cash, it's close, but it's not as good as cash because it can be frozen. Do you know what frozen means on a HELOC? It means they don't let you borrow from it anymore, right? So HELOC's great because it's a lot like a credit card or a bank account, but the bank account that you pay interest on if you use it, right? So if you're not using it, you're paying 0 interest, but once you use it, you pay interest. So it's really sweet. You got a $60,000 HELOC, you basically have $60,000 available to you. It's a nice safety net. But it becomes not a safety net if your bank says, we're freezing your HELOC because the economy just hit the fan and we think you're over leveraged, or we don't like something about your situation, or we're just freezing HELOCs.
So essentially, your answer to him was use the HELOC for a down payment, keep the cash as reserves?
That would be safer, but what I would probably do, unless I thought the economy was gonna fail and it was just gonna hit the fan, I would actually do the opposite. I would use the cash because you're saving the money on, you're saving the interest on the HELOC. So I would use the cash and then supplement with the HELOC to combine the total. That's how I would do it. Unless I really looked at things and thought, oh, things look really bad right now.
And
Does that make sense?
The way people think about the economy. Because 6 months ago, everybody said, oh, it's gonna crash next year. If you pay attention to the news today, everybody says, oh, everything's going good.
Well, and a recession isn't the same as a crash. I don't think a crash is happening, so I don't think they don't freeze HELOCs in a recession, they freeze them in a crash. There's a difference, right? There is a difference. And so I don't think you've got a big risk there, but again, I have to give you my advice, and my advice has to be a little bit more cautious than what I'd actually do.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah. So I would use I would use your cash to save money on the, save interest on the HELOC. Then I'd use the HELOC, and I would continually use all your cash to pay that HELOC back down, because it's essentially a savings account for you. It's a savings account you pay interest on.
Yep.
And then the cool thing about a HELOC is if you overpay on it, let's say you get a bonus from work, you got $7 grand, and you're like, I'm gonna pay down the HELOC. And then the next day the water heater breaks, guess what? You can just take that money right off the HELOC. It's no big deal. So it doesn't hurt you to aggressively pay that back down.
It's not like a mortgage.
Because well, you shouldn't have a large bank account if you have a balance on your HELOC. Because your bank account is paying you close to zero, right? We can all agree that if it's paying you anything, it's basically zero. And your HELOC's charging you 5-6%. So you're losing 5-6% by having just $20,000 balance in the bank. You keep the balance in the bank if you think that S is gonna hit the fan or you're gonna freeze your HELOC.
Right.
Otherwise, you pay it down towards that HELOC. Right?
Okay.
And then if you think S is gonna hit the fan, you write yourself a check and deposit in your account.
Sure. Yeah, just pay it down. Okay.
I don't think we're anywhere near that. Even if there's a recession,
Right.
we're talking about a couple percent in house values. It's not gonna be a housing driven problem, it's more like a, income, job stagnant, spending issue, which is a different case. In those situations, I'm not an economist, but from the reports I've read and the things I've read, housing always does exceptionally well in those type of recessions. The only time it ever does bad is in the housing crash, right?
Right.
If the crash is caused by housing, housing has a problem. Otherwise, it's the stable, most safe investment you can have.
Is there any other like regular monthly events maybe that you guys network at for meeting other investors?
I go to 4 or 5 a month. Not every single time, but like, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good meetups.
If you're interested,
If you
said
want to message me, I'll
wholesaling,
send you a
right?
bunch.
Yeah.
I would go to Minria. Minria is like a lot of what they do.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Is that like a website or a network?
They have a website and they have all kinds of stuff and they'll
You can go to
call you.
one event for free
Yeah.
there, and then they charge
But-
like an
How,
annual fee. It's
Is,
like $200
what's the
a year or
website?
something.
MNREIA, just telling you
Yeah.
when the next events are. They're probably not, maybe the only wholesaling focused.
oh, sweet.
Yeah, Mike
Yeah, they-
Jacka does a class, Wholesaling 101, and if you sign up, the class is included for free.
Yeah, so take everything with a grain of salt. Don't buy anything unless you check it out first.
Yeah, but there are other events. There's, meetup.com is a great place to find them, and if you message me, I'll send you the list of 7 that I think are worth going to, of which I go to about 4 or 5 of those, but I've heard good things about the others, and I know who run the other ones.
Could I get your contact information? Like,
Yeah, I mean, you
Put
listen
it
to
on the
that.
board too if you want to.
I'm not here to, I'm happy to do it, but I don't wanna be selling from the front. If someone wants to work with me, I'll do it here, but I don't want people to think that this is like, yeah. I'm happy to give you advice even if you don't use me as a loan officer, although that is how I feed my family.
And that's CZEK.
Yeah, C as in cat, Z as in zebra, AK. And that's how you spell my name too, right? So. Yeah, any other questions?
Yeah, for HELOCs, how much can you take out on an investment?
On an investment,
Yeah.
the highest I've ever seen is 80. I can help you with something like that, but typical is 75 for most banks. Actually, the fact is most banks don't do seconds on investment properties at all, at any amount, but the ones who do are typically 75. I know of 180.
Is it 75 of your equity or total?
Total, so no, it's not of your equity. So what you do is you take the price, let's call it $100. They'll go up to 80. Now what do you owe on your first? Subtract that and that's the difference. That's what your HELOC amount would be for. So if you owe $60, then you could borrow $20 on that $100 house.
I've seen HELOCs work better on primary residences than investment properties and
Yep.
just for the fact that, yeah, they only go up to 80%.
But here's another spot where you shouldn't like be rate focused, right? So here's the difference. You can get a HELOC at 89.9%. Every bank you can think of will lend to 89.9% on a HELOC, and they're gonna be pretty aggressive on rate. They're gonna fight for you on rate. Very few banks will go to 95%, but that extra 5% is probably the difference between making a deal happen or not, at some point. It might not be your next deal, right? It might be, you might get more than you need for the first deal. But it's still that same cushion that Jordan was talking about where if you don't put that extra 10 grand on the house, you got a 10 grand jump start on the next one. Same thing with the 5%. So you pay a 1% more on the money you use. You're not paying 1% more, let's be clear. You're only paying 1% more on the money you use because you got an expensive HELOC over a non-expensive HELOC. That doesn't matter. What matters is the deals you get done, right? I got nothing to gain there. I don't make money on HELOCs, right? At least not on the interest rate. So, the point is don't look at the rate, it doesn't matter, what's it gonna do for you? Get the biggest damn one you can get if you're gonna do it. Like, seriously. And then be careful with it, right? I mean, like, if you get it, that doesn't mean you use it irresponsibly. You use it to get deals done and you're careful with it. There is actually a lender out there right now, they just started advertising, they'll do 100% on primary residence HELOC. So for most people, if your house is worth $300,000, that's $30,000 more that you could invest in another property versus an 89.9% lender. And for that difference, you know, depends on how big your, you know, let's just say 1% on $100,000, we're talking about $1,000 a year, $80 a month. It's probably not a 1% difference, and you're probably not borrowing $100,000 a year. Certainly probably don't have $100,000 in any one given time. So like that's what I'm talking about is like people see 1%, they think, oh, I'd never do that, that's stupid. No, it's probably stupid to do the other if you're investing with the money. Now, if it's a primary residence and you're using it to buy big screen TVs, you should get the 89, well, you should not buy a big screen TV on the line of credit, is what you shouldn't do. But if you're going to do that, then you should get the 89.9 and shop for the best rate lender. But if you're using the money to invest, it's a tool. The cost of that tool is only important in that it needs to make sense to get the deal done. But the bigger your tool is and the better your tool is, the more money you're gonna make. So get the big line of credit at the expensive rate.
So if you find a property that doesn't need a whole lot of rehabbing, what would be the best loan option to use? Would it be like not a Fannie Mae, it sounds like, in your opinion?
Well, it could be, but it depends on how many you wanna own, right? Because, so imagine this, if each one of my fingers is 5%, right? That's 25%, right? So Fannie Mae requires 25% down payment. Portfolio requires 20% down payment. Stack this together and you use, it's a 20% smaller down payment by going with a portfolio loan over a Fannie Mae loan. Now we're only talking non-owner occupied. You should always get a Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or FHA loan, or VA, or whatever, if you're owner occupying. These loans are not appropriate for owner occupied. But that 20% down payment will always allow you to buy 20% more properties if you use the smaller down payment program, right? So that means that you could get 10 properties for the same down payment you'd have to come up with to get 8 on Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. So if you want to grow, yeah, I think you should. I've come to the conclusion that that's what I do, right? But I mean, again, like Jordan said, everyone else has their own opinions, but I'm in a growth mode, I'm in a growth mindset, and if I see a deal, I don't want to have an extra 5% in 5 deals and then not be able to do that one deal. So in my opinion, the portfolio loan is the better product. But it's not appropriate for everyone. You should have experience. You shouldn't be doing it, you know, you should have an owner-occupied house at first. In my opinion. Again, you know, I mean, everyone has their own opinions, and I'm just giving you mine today. But I wouldn't recommend a portfolio loan to anyone who hasn't at least tested out being a landlord first, right? That's important. It's very important, I think.
And one more thing about the HELOC. So if I can do the HELOC with any other lender, correct? I don't have to
Whoever you want, yeah. You don't have to use me for anything. I'm just up here giving you. But I would tell you this. I'll say this, and this is absolutely a plug for me. But most lenders don't own rental properties, and most of them haven't built a portfolio. And here's what they do: they're judged a lot like an accountant is judged, or a lot like a weather person is judged, right? So weather person, you know, they talk about like, don't blame me because the weather's bad. And your accountant, you judge your accountant by how much of a tax refund they get you, right? But your accountant didn't set your withholdings, so it's a false way to judge an accountant. But that's how people judge them, right? Because they don't know any better to judge them on any other metric. So they judge how big is my refund. It's not telling you whether you have a good accountant or not. It's just telling you how big of a refund is. But you did everything to create that refund. Now some accountants might not maximize the refund because they don't know what they're doing. That's how you have to judge them. But how do you do that to compare? Same thing with a loan officer. Most loan officers, their customers call us all the time and say, what's your rate? And so their focus is, how do I quote the lowest rate, right? If you're looking to go buy a single-family home, that's usually a pretty good metric, but it's not the only metric. Certainly closing costs have to be a factor always. There is no such thing as rate without closing costs, so that's a balance. But when you're looking at investment property, I'm here to tell you that if you go to most loan officers, they're gonna be trying to get you that transaction as sweet as possibly can be, and everything they do is gonna screw up your next transaction, and if it's not your next one, it's the one after that.
That happened to
So
me.
you will get poor advice from really well-meaning people if you don't go to someone like me. And it doesn't have to be me, but if you go to someone who doesn't know investment properties, you are gonna get the wrong advice every time. You're gonna get your uncle's advice or your dad's advice, which is unless they're real estate professionals, they don't know what they're talking about when it comes to investing in real estate and what loans you should go for and what you should be looking for in a loan. And I mean that, I'm a firm believer in that, and I'll get in a math argument with anyone out there on that one. So, yeah, but it's the truth. So why sugarcoat it? You know what I mean? So, any other questions?
Got one more. When you sold those couple properties, did you pay taxes on those, or did you roll that
I
into a
did.
1031?
Yeah, I did, because the investments I was going into were not appropriate for 1031.
Okay.
And so the good news is I have a great CPA, by the way. He knows real estate investing unlike any other. And we figured out a method where, because of the type of investment, I'm able to get very large deductions, which will offset an overwhelming majority of the money we made, but it won't offset all of it. We'll have some tax deductions. The cool thing is, because of the way my wife and I run our businesses, and we are very actively involved in our businesses, we get some tax advantages through the IRS that not everyone in the room can get, like most people in the room couldn't get. And that means that the tax I pay will be on my not my earned income, but on my capital gains, right?
Okay.
So capital gains rate is at a lower rate than earned income. So I'll be able to write off I'll be able to write off my write-offs towards my earned income, and the tax I am paying is at a lower rate than I would pay if I did it the other way. And that's an advantage you get from being heavily involved in your real estate.
Kind of like you're an employee of the business, more or less.
You have to meet certain thresholds by working a certain amount of hours in your real estate. So real estate is definitely a part-time job for my wife and I, especially my wife. It's really her main focus. She spends half a work week on real estate.
Okay.
And that gets us some advantages.
Sure.
And then, Jordan, I don't know if you mentioned that you got screwed over by the loan officer when you got.
I didn't work with the loan officer.
Bad advice, not screwed over, right?
Investments.
Oh, yeah,
I didn't
sorry.
get
Yeah.
screwed over by
Yeah.
them. They just didn't know investment properties and gave me bad advice, and I missed out on a few properties because of it, and it made it harder to get my next property because of it. So two different loan officers, actually. First one just, I don't know, I don't know, just didn't understand investment properties and what I needed to do to qualify for them, and what I could buy was the bigger issue. The second one, he got me into the property, got me into the first property just fine. Everything went great. But then when I went to buy the second, I was like, oh, by the way, you actually, and at the time, I met Tim, I think about a year later. He said, hey, well, if you would've bought this 5% conventional loan down, the next one could've been a 3.5% down. I did, at the time.
In opposite order.
3.5% down. They said, okay, for your next one, you need 15% down. So I said, well, I don't have 15% down. So I figured out something else. I did seller financing, not as creative as what he outlined, but where there's a will, there's a way. But yeah, work with people that know it front and back, and it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, there's about, roughly 6 loan officers in the Twin Cities who are really, really up on investment financing. But the rest of them,
They don't teach you that stuff.
They just don't know. They don't know what they don't know. And they don't understand the guidelines enough because they're not working it enough to be able to do those pitfalls. My advice on the issue Jordan's talking about has flip-flopped back and forth multiple times. What loan is better to start with, FHA versus conventional, changes based on what the guidelines, how the guidelines change. And when they change, it's like, well, here's what we have to do now because it's better, right? But those guys, those people, because nowadays, they don't know that because they're not paying attention, Fannie Mae's, if you were to print out Fannie Mae's guidelines, it would be well over 1,000 pages. Same with FHA. no loan officer knows every single guideline to every single loan type, including myself. I'm pretty good at them, I like them, I don't know why, but I do. Probably because it helps me solve problems, but I look things up all the time. I do know the rental guidelines very, very well, because that's what I do, right? If someone does, I also know the divorce guidelines really, really well. What I don't know is new construction, like new construction ground up, they call it new construction to permanent financing. I don't know those guidelines. I know if someone came to me, I could look them up, but I don't know them, you know? But same thing would be true of most loan officers. They might know the guidelines of one program, but not the other. If they don't know how they interact and how that would affect your planning in the future. Because anyone could tell you what's the best loan for you today. But is that the best loan for you for property 2, 3, or 4? Because real estate investing, there's not one person in this room that's gonna retire off of one purchase. That just will not happen, right? So if you go by if you look at it as just one purchase and you sacrifice purchase 2, or you make purchase 2 or 3 harder because of purchase 1, you just failed yourself. And that's what I'm getting at. Like, that's why I'm so adamant about it, and that's why I kind of, there is a proper way to do it, and most loan officers just don't know it.
Is there any advice so I just, for my situation, we put the duplex in my wife's name.
Okay, that's a good idea.
So, now I have the freedom, now, obviously I can't, owner occupy because I'm living with my wife. But
You can after 1 year?
yeah, after 1 year. So now I have kind of, I can find a deal in a creative way.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes, you could do a non-occupied
Yeah.
anytime, right? Yeah.
And basically find a way to fund the down payment with as little amount of money as in my pocket as possible.
Correct.
Pretty much.
Yep.
Okay.
By the way, whoever you talked to there probably did a good thing. Jordan and I have done videos on this. I always recommend you put the least amount of hours on a loan that you can. So in this case, you obviously did that. And there's strategy for that, again, getting into the math and how loan guidelines work. So whoever, that was a positive, whoever recommended that, unless you recommended it. Okay, well, yeah. Well, that came through me, because I taught him that, just for the record.
And
The same-
that gets emotional too. I mean,
Yeah.
it's all emotional thing. Is
People have
we
egos.
wanted to be on it together.
Yeah.
It's like, it really doesn't matter. When you talked about rationally, you know,
Yeah.
CJ can go buy one, they can live together for a year here. In the end, the property rights in Minnesota, you both, if you're married, you both have 50% ownership of it. So both being on the loan together means absolutely nothing. It just means both your credit scores are dinged by it and you've got the burden of the loan.
Right, and so saying this name, at least 50% of people are gonna be turned off by this, but I think he makes a good point, because we all know he would be shrewd at real estate. Would Trump care if his name's on a loan, if it got him a better deal by putting in someone else's name? The answer is no, right? You can't have an ego about this stuff, it's just business, whatever the best thing for you to do, move forward, that's legal, is what you should do, right? And that brings up a good point, and that some free advice I can give you that most loan officers won't give you also is, absolutely, this concept applies to every financing you do if you have a partner, which is you should never co-sign for anybody, including your partner, if you don't need to. If you want to be a real estate investor, okay? If you want to be a real estate investor, never co-sign unless you have to, and I mean have to. The example I can give you is this. I know this, right? We're growing. My wife does not make enough income to qualify for loans, for mortgages, but she can qualify for auto loans and stuff like that. So we go out and buy a loan, and they want me to co-sign for her, because why wouldn't they, right? It's always better for the bank if someone co-signs, even if they don't need it.
For the car, you said.
For the car.
Buy a
Yep.
loan.
Yep, I'm sorry, for a car, yeah, car loan. 30,000, roughly a $30,000 minivan. And I said flat out no. I'm like, if you can't get my wife approved solely, then we're not buying. Magically, they got her approved at terms that were totally acceptable. We did pay a slightly higher interest rate, and I wanna make that point. We didn't get the lowest possible rate. And here's where I'll go right back. I believe everything I'm telling you. I will always pay a higher rate if it does something for me. Because that $600 car loan, divide 600 by 5 and tell me how much I would've lost in purchasing power. Is that $300,000? Right? That's what that car loan, me co-signing on that would have affected me by that much. So, do I care if I pay, because a 0.5% on $30,000 or whatever the difference was, so 1% on $30,000 is how much a year? Is it $300? Is that right? $300, right? So we're talking about $150 more in interest per year because we got a high rate, because we're paying this crazy high rate, right? I'm trying to put it in perspective. People, your friends and family are gonna be like, oh, you always, no, you should co-sign. You, why would you pay an extra $500,000? Why wouldn't you? Is what I would say to you. And that's the exact advice that most loan officers won't give you, right? They won't tell you that, they should be like, oh no, protect your debt income. What I'm saying is protect your debt income so much that you don't even put it in your loan. We bought a new house. The soft water went in my wife's name. The loan for the soft water system, the gutters, my wife's name. Our new car, my wife's name. Anything that's not a mortgage goes in her name because she can qualify for those. All on her DTI, none of it touches me. And that's how you should all do everything. If you need a car and one of you doesn't qualify and you want to be a real estate investor, that's where you have to decide how bad you want it. Maybe you need to change up what car you get or something like that. I'm not here to tell you what your decisions are, but I'm telling you that not everything my wife and I has always done has been easy, but it's been very fruitful, right? Like it works. It's just not always pleasant. The car loan is no big deal, like that's not unpleasant. But what I'm telling you is sometimes you have to sacrifice. I know Jordan, house hacked, and he had roommates. He actually even Airbnb'd out rooms in his bedroom to like strangers, right? It's probably a little uncomfortable, but he made a crap ton of money. He lived for free, and now he's got 20 units because of it.
It was not comfortable. Airbnb guests cook some weird food when they're staying there for a month and they're from all over the world. But, yeah, it absolutely is worth it.
Yeah, so I mean, if you're tight on DTI, there's all kinds of little things that you can affect your DTI. And there's, so if anyone wants to meet, we will go through those in a one-on-one basis. But the overall advice is never co-sign for anyone unless you have to. If it's the only way, then by all means. But it usually isn't, and often if you tell them there's no way you're gonna co